The dining room felt impossibly small that Sunday evening. I had spent 4 hours preparing my signature lasagna, layering noodles and sauce with the kind of care that used to make me feel alive. My hands trembled slightly as I placed the dish on the table, steam rising into the silence. Michael sat at the head of the table, scrolling through his phone. His mother, Diane, adjusted her napkin with deliberate precision. I served generous portions, hoping the familiar aroma would break the tension that always seemed to hang between us. Diane lifted her fork slowly. She cut a small piece, brought it to her lips, and chewed exactly 3 times before her face twisted. The grimace was unmistakable. She reached for her water glass and took a long drink, as if trying to wash away the taste. "This isn't good enough for my son," she said flatly, her words landing like stones in still water. Everyone froze. Michael didn't look up from his phone. He didn't say a single word in my defense. The silence that followed was louder than any argument could have been. Diane pushed her plate to the side and announced she would order takeout. I felt my heart sink into my stomach, burning with humiliation that I would carry with me long after that meal ended. My name is Elena Lee, and I never thought food would become the battlefield where my marriage slowly crumbled. I stared at my reflection in the mirror that night, wondering when I had stopped recognizing the woman looking back at me. Years ago I was different. I was a bright-eyed culinary student with dreams bigger than my hometown. I had notebooks filled with recipes I wanted to create, techniques I wanted to master, and a vision of opening my own restaurant someday. Everything changed the moment Michael proposed on a snowy December evening outside my favorite cafe. He was charming and ambitious, and I was young and in love. When he asked me to move to his city and build a life together, I didn't hesitate. I dropped out of culinary school without a second thought. I told myself I would return to my dreams later, that love was more important than ambition. I moved into a world I didn't recognize. Diane's world of perfect silverware, designer furniture, and unspoken rules I could never quite follow. I traded my apron for an expectation I couldn't meet, and somewhere along the way, I forgot that I had ever wanted anything for myself. Every family dinner became a performance where I was always the supporting actor in someone else's play. Diane would critique everything I prepared with surgical precision. The rice was undercooked. The salt was too much. The spices were too bold for Michael's sensitive palate. She said these things with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, as if delivering compliments disguised as weapons. Michael would laugh awkwardly, as if his mother's comments were harmless jokes instead of tiny cuts that added up over time. I started to dread cooking entirely, which felt like the cruelest irony imaginable. The one thing that had once brought me joy now filled me with anxiety and dread. My hands would shake as I prepared meals, anticipating criticism before I even finished plating. I would lie awake at night, replaying conversations, wondering what I had done wrong and how I could possibly do better. The kitchen, which had once been my sanctuary, became a place of fear and humiliation. Michael noticed my reluctance but never asked why. He simply assumed I was losing interest in cooking, not realizing that his silence was louder than any words he could have spoken. The moment that finally broke something inside me happened on a regular Tuesday evening. Michael was at work, and I was preparing a roast chicken for dinner. I had been researching recipes all week, determined to create something worthy of praise. The kitchen smelled wonderful as the chicken turned golden brown in the oven. That's when I heard Diane's voice from the living room, where she had let herself in as she always did without knocking. "I can't believe you married someone so ordinary," she was telling Michael over the phone, not knowing I could hear her clearly. The words hit like a physical blow. My hands froze. The tray of roast chicken slipped from my fingers and crashed onto the floor with a deafening sound that echoed through the entire house. Chicken scattered across the tile. Diane appeared in the doorway, and instead of apologizing or showing concern, she simply smirked. That smirk said everything, that she had meant those words, that she enjoyed knowing I had heard them, and that she would never see me as worthy of her son. I realized in that moment that I could spend my entire life trying to prove myself to her, and never succeed. The next morning something shifted inside me. I couldn't continue living for other people's approval. I sat in my small studio apartment, which I had claimed as my own refuge, and I pulled out my laptop. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just scrolling through cooking videos to distract myself from the emptiness I felt. Then I found him, Chef Marco Delane. He was teaching a segment on rustic cooking, showing people how to make simple ingredients sing with flavor and technique. He spoke about cooking with passion, about understanding your food, about creating dishes that told stories. Something inside me ignited. I watched video after video of Marco teaching, demonstrating, creating magic in his kitchen. His energy was infectious, his knowledge profound, and his love for cooking was obvious in every movement he made. For the first time in years, I felt that old spark rekindling inside my chest. The spark that had made me want to be a chef in the first place. I realized that I had let other people extinguish my fire, and that maybe, just maybe, I could light it again. That night I started cooking again, not for anyone else but for myself. I mentioned the cook-off casually at brunch one Sunday, expecting a normal response. Instead, Diane burst into laughter as if I had told the funniest joke she had heard all year. "Sweetheart," she said, wiping tears from her eyes, "those events are for real cooks." The words stung, but I had learned to expect them. What hurt more was Michael's reaction. He muttered under his breath, "Just don't embarrass us." His words felt like a betrayal wrapped in concern. I wanted to scream at him, to make him understand that I wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. I was trying to save myself. But I had learned long ago that screaming didn't help. It only made Diane more convinced that I was unstable and unsuitable for her son. So I smiled politely and said nothing. I simply decided that I wouldn't tell them about my decision to actually enter the competition. I would prepare in silence, practice in secret, and let my food speak for itself if I got the chance. For once, I wasn't cooking to impress them. I was cooking to remind myself of who I used to be, and maybe who I could become if I was brave enough to try. I would taste sauce after sauce, adjusting ingredients, writing notes in a journal that I kept hidden in a box under the sink. Some nights I burned things so badly that I had to throw them away and start over. Other nights I created something so delicious that I wanted to cry. My notebook is filled with sauce ratios and emotional notes. Thoughts about why I felt certain ways, dreams I had abandoned, and the person I wanted to become. Michael never asked what I was doing. He simply assumed I was cooking for the following day's meals. For the first time in our relationship, I had something that was entirely mine. The day before the competition, I was organizing my ingredients when Diane arrived at the house unannounced. She had called ahead, insisting that she wanted to help me prepare. I should have known better than to trust her offer of assistance. While I was in the bathroom, she rearranged my carefully labeled spice jars. She had replaced the sugar with salt in my main seasoning blend. A sabotage so calculated that it made my blood run cold when I discovered it. I stared at the swap jars for a full minute, trying to process what she had done. She had actually attempted to ruin my dish before I even had the chance to cook it. When I confronted her, she played innocent, laughing it off as a silly mistake. But we both knew the truth. The betrayal cut deeper than any insult she had ever thrown my way. It showed me that she was afraid. Afraid that I might succeed. Afraid that I might prove her wrong. Afraid that I might become someone she couldn't control. I removed the salt and replaced the sugar where it belonged. I also removed Diane from my mind and my heart. The morning of the cook-off arrived bright and clear, as if even the weather was rooting for me. The community center was transformed into a culinary arena. Multiple cooking stations set up, cameras positioned around the room, and crowds already gathering. My heart pounded as I walked through the doors. The energy was electric and terrifying all at once. Other competitors looked so confident, so experienced, so ready. I felt small and out of place, just as Diane had predicted. Then the announcement came that made the crowd gasp. Marco Delane had been added as a surprise guest judge. The man whose videos had inspired me to dream again was here, in this room, about to eat food prepared by people just like me. I spotted Diane in the audience, whispering something to a woman beside her. I could read her lips. "Oh dear, this will be painful." I took a deep breath, placed my ingredients at my station, and decided that no matter what happened, I was going to create something beautiful. My hands shook as I worked, but I focused on the techniques Marco had taught, on the passion that had been building inside me for months. I blocked out the cameras, the crowds, and the other competitors. It was just me and my food, the way it used to be when I was young and full of dreams. Hours passed like minutes. When I finally plated my dish, my reimagined lasagna with a delicate sauce and perfectly toasted breadcrumb topping. I knew I had created something special. The judges rotated through the stations, tasting and commenting. When Marco approached my dish, he cut a small piece and placed it on his fork. He took a bite and his eyes widened. He took another bite, slower this time, really tasting it. Then he looked up directly at me. "Who cooked this?" he demanded, his voice carrying across the room. My stomach flipped. I raised my hand timidly, not trusting my voice. He smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes. "This," he said loudly, "is spectacular. This is restaurant quality." The room erupted in gasps and applause. Diane's face went pale. A camera crew had captured the entire exchange. The clip of Marco praising my dish went viral overnight. Within hours, my phone was exploding with notifications. The video had been shared thousands of times, with comments like, "Home cook stuns celebrity chef," and "She deserves her own show." Messages poured in from people I hadn't spoken to in years, all wanting to celebrate my success now that it was public. I even received a message from Diane. "Call me immediately." I didn't call her. For the first time, I simply didn't respond. Instead, I sat with the feeling of validation, letting it wash over me like rain after a long drought. I had created something beautiful, and a respected chef had recognized it. More importantly, I had recognized it myself. That was the real victory. The viral moment was wonderful, but it wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was that I had proven to myself that I was worth something. I was capable. I was talented. And most importantly, I was brave enough to try. Now that I had a public face and a story, Diane suddenly wanted to be part of my glow-up. She posted online with hashtags and emojis, proud of my daughter-in-law's big moment. She called local news stations, offering to share behind-the-scenes family stories about my journey. Michael said she just wanted to help manage my image, make sure the narrative stayed positive. But I could see through her sudden sweetness. She smelled opportunity. She wanted to be the proud mother-in-law of a rising culinary star, to bask in my success and claim partial credit for it. I politely declined all her offers of assistance. I didn't need her help. I didn't need her validation. In fact, her attempts to insert herself into my story only made me more certain that I needed to build my own path, separate from her influence. The dynamic was shifting in ways that terrified both Diane and Michael. I was no longer the quiet, obedient daughter-in-law. I was becoming something they couldn't control. Michael's reaction to my growing success was not what I expected. Instead of being proud, he grew distant and cold. He would mock my interviews, saying things like, "Don't let this go to your head," and "It's just one cook-off." His jealousy was palpable and ugly. I realized that he had gotten comfortable with me being small, with me needing him, with me depending on his approval. My success threatened the balance of power in our relationship, and he resented it deeply. He would come home late and avoid spending time with me. When I tried to talk about exciting opportunities that were coming my way, he would dismiss them or turn the conversation back to his own work. The man I had married and sacrificed my dreams for was now treating me like a threat. It hurt, but it also clarified something important. I had been living for a man who wasn't willing to celebrate me or support me. Our marriage had been built on my smallness, and now that I was growing, the foundation was cracking. Marco reached out to me through social media with a message that changed everything. He remembered my dish and my passion when he saw me working at the competition. He wanted to mentor me part-time, to help me develop my skills further. "You've got instinct," he wrote. "Not everyone does. I think you could do something really special if you're willing to work for it." When I read those words, I nearly cried. Someone I respected, someone I admired, believed in me. That belief was worth more than anything Michael had ever given me. We arranged to meet at his test kitchen the following week. He showed me techniques, shared his philosophy about cooking, and treated me like a real chef rather than a hobby cook playing in her kitchen. For the first time in my adult life, I felt seen and valued for my actual abilities. Marco saw past the surface to the genuine talent underneath. He pushed me to work harder, to think bigger, and to believe that I deserved success. When I told Michael about the mentorship, he didn't congratulate me. Instead, we had our biggest fight yet. He said I was neglecting our marriage, that I was being selfish and ungrateful for everything he had provided. I looked at him with new clarity and realized something profound. I had spent years trying to meet his needs, supporting his career, and making myself smaller so he could feel bigger. Now that I was finally prioritizing myself, he thought I was being unreasonable. I said things I had been holding back for years. "You may not need this," I told him, my voice steady and clear. "But I do. I need this more than I need anything else right now. I need to know who I am when I'm not trying to be what everyone else wants me to be." He stormed out of the apartment, texting Diane within minutes. I watched my phone fill with messages from his family, all questioning my character and my commitment to my marriage. But for the first time, their words didn't cut me the way they used to. I had finally learned that their approval wasn't necessary for my survival. I moved into a small studio apartment to focus on my training and give myself space to think. The studio was modest, barely bigger than a walk-in closet, but it was mine. I had no television, just a bed, a kitchenette, and books about cooking. Diane immediately went into crisis mode, calling everyone in her social circle to tell them that I had abandoned my husband and my marriage. She painted herself as the victim, the concerned mother trying to hold her family together. The narrative she created was compelling, and people believed it. Social media became a battleground. Half the internet supported me, sharing their own stories of difficult in-laws and lost dreams. The other half called me selfish, saying I should have prioritized my marriage over my career. The scrutiny was intense and overwhelming at times, but I tried not to let it shake my resolve. I knew my truth. I knew that I had tried for years to make my marriage work, and that I was finally choosing myself. Before a cooking showcase event where I was supposed to present a dish, Diane showed up backstage. She was all smiles and sweetness, talking about reconciliation and making peace. She suggested that we should all work through this as a family. But then she reached for my ingredients and suggested making a small change to my seasoning. I watched her hand hover over my carefully prepared components, and I stopped her. "Don't touch my food," I said quietly but firmly. She looked shocked, as if the idea that I would set a boundary had never occurred to her. But I meant every word. This was my space, my creation, my moment. I had learned that sometimes protecting yourself means saying no even to people you love. Diane left backstage shortly after, her face tight with anger. I knew I had made an enemy out of someone who had never been truly on my side, but I also knew it was necessary. The live cooking show arrived and I was ready. Under bright studio lights, I plated my signature lasagna, the same dish that Diane had once called not good enough for her son. The host introduced my story to the audience. A woman was told her cooking wasn't good enough. Tonight she proves otherwise. I listened to my own journey being narrated for cameras and crowds, and I felt a strange sense of completion. This was my story now. No one could take it from me. The judges tasted my dish with obvious enjoyment. One commented on the balance of flavors. Another praised the texture and presentation. But it was Marco who really understood what I had created. "This is comfort food turned art," he said thoughtfully. "You've taken something traditional and made it personal. You've made it mean something." The applause that followed wasn't just about my cooking. It was validation that I existed, that I mattered, that my skills and my voice had value. When I finished my presentation, I realized I was finally free. Free from the need for Diane's approval. Free from Michael's limitations. Free from the small version of myself that I had been living for so long. My eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of sadness or regret. They were tears of relief and gratitude and the profound recognition that I had made it through something difficult and come out on the other side transformed. The cameras caught my emotional moment, and it went viral again. People resonated with the visible relief in my expression, with the understanding that this was about more than just cooking. This was about a woman reclaiming herself. Articles were written about my story. Other women shared their own experiences of sacrificing their dreams for relationships that didn't support them. I became a symbol of something larger than myself, and I tried my best to carry that responsibility with grace. Backstage after the taping, Michael called me. His voice was apologetic but also self-pitying. He tried to explain that he hadn't meant things the way they came out, that his mother didn't mean to be cruel, that everyone was just trying to help. I listened to his words without interrupting, hearing all the old patterns and excuses. When he finished, I simply said, "I know." And then I hung up gently. Not in anger but in peace. I had said what I needed to say, and now it was time to move forward without him. The conversation felt oddly anticlimactic, but that was the point. Dramatic confrontations were what I had lived through for years. Quiet closure was what I needed now. I sat in my dressing room, removing my makeup and thinking about what came next. The future felt open and full of possibility in a way it never had before. The internet took sides in ways that both helped and complicated my healing. My speech and my story trended on multiple platforms. Thousands of comments flooded my social media feeds. Stories from people with difficult in-laws, tales of lost dreams and reclaimed lives. But with the support came something else. Diane's social circle began to turn cold toward her. She was no longer the adored matriarch of her community. She was the villain in a viral story. People who had once attended her dinner parties and admired her perfect house now whispered about how she had treated me. I didn't celebrate her downfall, even though part of me wanted to. Her isolation was a natural consequence of her actions, but it wasn't actually what I wanted for anyone. What I wanted was for her to understand, to reflect, and to grow. But I also knew that wasn't necessarily going to happen. When Diane and I finally spoke, it was in person, not online. She came to Marco's test kitchen where I was working, finding me in a small office surrounded by recipe notebooks. She said through clenched teeth, "You humiliated me." Her words came from a place of genuine pain, and I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I replied calmly, "No. You did that yourself." I then did something unexpected. I offered her a slice of my lasagna, the dish that had started everything. She looked at the plate as if it might poison her. She took a bite, but she couldn't swallow it. It wasn't about the taste. It was about her pride, her refusal to admit she had been wrong. She stood up, left the plate on the table, and walked out without another word. I watched her go, understanding finally that some people are so attached to their version of the truth that they can never accept the reality in front of them. Marco's restaurant offered me a seasonal guest chef position. It was everything I had dreamed about when I was a bright-eyed culinary student before my life became about making everyone else comfortable. I invited Michael to my opening night, hoping that maybe seeing me in this context, successful, talented, confident, might help him understand what he had lost. He didn't show up. But Diane did. She sat quietly in the corner of the restaurant, unseen by most people, watching me work. I didn't speak to her, but I noticed her there, witnessing my success from a distance. Michael moved out of his mother's house, ashamed of his role in my story. Diane began experiencing the consequences of her behavior in ways she couldn't control or manipulate. Her social image crumbled. Gossip spread through her community about how she had belittled me, and how her pride had driven her son away. She was left alone at her perfect dinner table, food untouched, surrounded by beautiful things that couldn't make her feel less lonely. I felt sad for her in a distant way, the way you might feel sad for a character in a story. But I also understood that this was her journey to walk, just as mine was my own. I hosted my first on-camera cooking segment for a Food Network. The dish I chose was my reimagined lasagna, my mother-in-law's favorite reimagined. I smiled into the camera with genuine happiness. "Sometimes," I said, "you don't need to serve revenge cold. You just serve it beautifully." The music swelled as the camera faded out on the finished dish, golden and perfect and completely my own. And somewhere I imagined Diane was watching from her empty kitchen, finally tasting humility.